Crime doesn't pay, except for all the times that it pays quite a lot. So if you're a criminal sitting on a Scarface-sized pile of cash, how do you spend it? One of the most successful criminals of all time was the one and only Pablo Escobar. At his peak, he was worth well over $64 billion in today's money. So how did he spend that cash? Well, on a little bit of everything. His Colombian estate is his most famous. It's a Spanish colonial house that also features some insane extras, such as a zoo, an airport, and a kart racing track. This home was abandoned when everything fell apart for the family. Strangely enough, it met the opposite fate in the end. Hacienda Naples was transformed into a theme park, because what says a happy time for the whole family like crime? It's like Scarface Disneyland. Pablo also had a great love of cars, though possibly not just the kinds of cars you would think of. You see, he had a deep passion for racing. For a short time in his life, he wanted to be a professional race car driver. So he purchased several race cars, such as the Renault 4, worth over $2,000, and his Porsche 1974 911 RSR IROC, worth over $1 million. Even drug lords have to have dreams, I guess. Escobar actually had something in common with another Netflix star, the Tiger King himself, Joe Exotic. Pablo had a bizarre love for exotic animals, in particular, hippos. The problem was, when it was time for that family to abandon the estate forever, they sort of just abandoned the hippos to their own devices. Turns out, these hippos were survivors. This has actually caused a bit of a problem because the hippos he introduced to new ecosystems have multiplied and become an environmental hazard. It feels kind of right that the descendants of Pablo Escobar's pets are taking over parts of Colombia and attacking people because there are no predators big enough to cross them. Even when the heat was on, Escobar showed how to spend. He agreed to turn himself in under a few conditions. Those included guarantees that he would not be extradited and that he could do his sentence in his own homemade prison. It was less of a prison, really, than it was another mansion for him to relax in. The prison, known as the Cathedral or the Hotel Escobar, featured plenty of the kinds of over-the-top additions someone like Escobar would be known for. Those included a football pitch, a giant dollhouse, a bar, a jacuzzi, and a waterfall. Not only that, but it was reported to have a telescope that he installed so that he could keep an eye on his family from prison. Overall, this doesn't really sound like punishment to me. Well, authorities thought the same. Once Pablo heard they were going to transfer him to a real prison, he escaped his cathedral and went on the run for the remainder of his life, when authorities finally did catch up to him. Ever since Pablo passed, criminals all over the world have been trying to live up to his reputation. Though there are other better role models one could pick from. Why can't we have less Pablo Escobars in the world and more LeVar Burtons inspiring children about how reading can be fun? Al Capone definitely set the tone for what criminals would be aspiring to for the next century or so. He was the head of the Chicago outfit during Prohibition. When adjusted for inflation, Capone was worth well over $1 billion. So what does a Prohibition kingpin spend that kind of fortune on? Well, it turns out paranoia is a lot more expensive than you'd think. One of his most famous homes was his pad in Miami Beach. He purchased it for $40,000 in 1922 and then poured over $200,000 renovating it. No, not the fun renovations one would expect either. These included extreme security measures like a gatehouse, a 7-foot-tall wall, and searchlights. He even had guards specifically located to take on anyone trying to arrive at his home by boat. It may look like a white party pad with 4 bedrooms, a pool, palm trees, and everything else you would expect from a Miami Beach home, but it became more of a fortress. It was eventually purchased for $10 million, though unfortunately it was purchased for demolition. The entire house had been abandoned for years and was left to rot. As far as cars go, they showed just how far his paranoia went as well. He famously had a 1928 Cadillac Town sedan that was outfitted with bulletproof glass. Even his going around town car had to be upgraded for his protection. Now the car's value is linked directly to Capone, going for over $1 million at a recent auction. In order to keep himself out of jail, Capone had to drop a sizable fortune on bribes. How much did he have to spend a year? Well, he himself estimated that it cost him like $30 million a year to bribe everyone it took to keep him on the streets. That didn't matter much when it came to his unpaid taxes, though. After everything, Capone was taken down for tax evasion. Then he lost everything he had left when he was finally put behind bars for the remainder of his life. It seemed like all of that money and all of that success was not enough to help Al Capone sleep soundly at night. This seems to be a running theme, as Pablo Escobar and many other criminals had the exact same type of paranoia. Say what you will about making huge fortunes, a good night's sleep can be worth more than anything. What's even sadder is that Capone evidently hid hundreds of millions of dollars somewhere before he went to prison. Then, towards the end of his life, his mind was so gone that he couldn't even remember where he'd hidden it. This matches other reports of business owners who found mysterious vaults inside their walls that were connected to the mobster. Somewhere out there, Capone's hidden fortune is waiting for someone like you to find it. John Gotti was one of the most notorious gangsters the United States had ever seen. He was the head of the Gambino crime family after taking out the former boss, Paul Castellano. When he took over, he became the head of America's biggest crime family. This success brought him a hefty fortune of around $30 million, on par with many CEOs of Fortune 500 companies of the day. Aside from all of that, he was also known for his over-the-top personality. America loves one thing more than prosecuting gangsters, and that's going to see gangster movies. Things like The Godfather, Goodfellas, and The Sopranos all made the Gotti story seem more like a real-life Scorsese movie than it did the actual serious situation it was. His sense of style that seemed lifted right out of the movies earned him the affectionate nickname, the Dapper Don. First, we've got the infamous Gotti Estate. It's an old Westbury, New York mansion that tries harder than anything else in Gotti's life to prove that he was just as classy and successful a businessman as he appeared. It has a vaguely White House-style design with a white-on-white color scheme and those big, Greek-looking columns. In basic terms, it's a 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom, 7,000 square foot estate. It also had plenty of insane mobster amenities one would expect from a guy like Gotti. I mean, the family even had a reality show called Growing Up Gotti. It had a detached garage, triple-level pool, a hot tub, a bar, a guest house with a detached garage itself, and a horse stable with an in-law suite. Much classier than one might expect for a vicious crime boss. What you probably would expect was the hidden room somebody found located behind a bookshelf. When it was discovered, it was long after the family had abandoned the house, so who knows what was hidden there. One can assume it at the very least held hundreds of thousands of pre-laundered cash. That's what the criminals in Ozark or Breaking Bad would do. Gotti was known for his Gucci suits that went for thousands of dollars. He also wore expensive watches and rings which could cost thousands more. He also looked to collect classic cars, as things like an abandoned Model T were found on the property. This matches his public tastes, like his red 1972 Jaguar convertible or his iconic Cadillac Fleetwood. Of course, being a crime lord means you have certain irregular purchases you have to make in order to keep your business afloat. For John Gotti, that irregular transaction kept him out of jail. For years, he went under the nickname the Teflon Don because of how notoriously difficult it was to convict him, even though he was openly committing illegal activity. It turns out that his legal luck was acquired through jury tampering, juror misconduct, and witness intimidation, none of which comes cheap. This also included the hiring of some of the best lawyers money can buy. It turns out that New York-based criminal defense lawyer Jeffrey Lichtman is the go-to lawyer for big-time crime bosses who wanted to fight for their freedom. His services ran up hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it proved to be very worth it. He was able to secure a dismissal of 3 major charges, an acquittal on a $25 million securities fraud charge, and a hung jury on every remaining count that stood against him. Though it is helpful to any defense team when there are shady things happening behind the scenes to push the jury in their direction. All this luck couldn't last forever. After being recorded saying horrible things about his underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, his lieutenant decided to turn against him to the FBI. He was eventually found guilty of a host of incredibly serious crimes. This earned him a sentence of a life in prison without the possibility of parole, which Gotti fully served in 2002 when he passed away still behind bars. Though the most painful thing about the entire story is the inevitable Hollywood take on the Gotti tale. John Travolta's Gotti film ended up becoming perhaps the worst gangster film of all time. Worse than Godfather Part 3 bad. Even for someone like Gotti, that's pretty bad. Once upon a time, Wall Street was thought of as an honorable place, built on institutions normal American workers could trust with their money. Then came Jordan Belfort, and it became hard to ever see Wall Street the same way again. He began Stratton Oakmont, a firm which specialized in pump and dump penny stocks with huge commissions. The company started making money hand over foot, which led to pretty much every temptation imaginable. Belfort was able to get a fortune of over $115 million, which he put to good use. That included his $3.4 million estate in Long Island. It's a 8,706 square foot home on 2 acres in Old Brooksville that features 5 bedrooms. It also has a 2-story foyer, a ballroom-sized living room, and a specially designed top-of-the-line kitchen. Everything about the estate is class and decadence to the max, from the architecture to the furnishing to the chandeliers. It's clear Belfort wanted to establish his family as true power players in the area with a house that says it all. Even the billiards parlor has a coffered ceiling and a wet bar nicer than many you'd see in a 5-star establishment. Then there's the master suite, which is more like a master wing of the house, with a fireplace, a huge living area, and a dressing room with a painted sky ceiling, because walk-in closets are for people who are only kinda rich. Then there's his 37-meter super yacht known as the Nadine. It was a huge boat that once belonged to Coco Chanel herself. It was the biggest yacht on the East Coast at the time, even bigger when Belfort made sure that his helicopter could fit on top. The entire interior is as classy as his home, with beautiful dining areas, living areas, and dock areas. It was a $12 million yacht that turned heads even in yacht clubs full of similar ships. Only his actually sank beneath the waves during one of the heaviest storms of the year. The Nadine is still on the bottom of the ocean, probably with some designer suits and illicit substances still hidden inside. What we talked about are just the PG hobbies that are allowed on YouTube. There's an entire video's worth of illicit hobbies Belfort and friends got into, which are all distinctly R-rated. If you really want to know about the depravity, either read Belfort's book on the subject, The Wolf of Wall Street, or check out the movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio by Martin Scorsese. They pretty much go into every single decadent thing Belfort and his crew ever did. And you won't believe how much of it 100% actually happened. After Belfort eventually went down for the count for crimes like fraud and insider trading, we started finding out that his kinds of crimes were a lot more widespread in Wall Street than anyone thought. Enron, the housing crisis, and about 30 other high-profile controversies have proven that Wall Street is full of wolves, and most of them don't even have their own Martin Scorsese movie. Anyone who is a fan of Western movies, history, or just the game Red Dead Redemption 2 has a healthy curiosity about what it was like for some of the most famous outlaws of the legendary Wild West. The name that has been carried across the decades the most is the one and only outlaw Jesse James. During the late 1800s, James led a gang that successfully robbed banks, stagecoaches, trains, and pretty much anything else they could. One of their most famous heists came when they took a bank in Lexington, Missouri for $2,000, an amount of money that would today be worth well over $61,000. So what did famous outlaws drop their cash on when they weren't having quick draws, saloon fights, or whatever else cowboys do in their downtime? Well, the legend would tell you that James and his gang acted like something like Robin Hood, that they stole to enrich the impoverished and stole out of a sense of honor. It turns out that this is all a complete falsehood. In all actuality, cowboy outlaws are about as bad with money as you'd imagine cowboy outlaws to be. Despite pilfering a small fortune, it's been said that James and his crew mostly wasted all of the cash and valuables they picked up over the years. Even the home that James lived in towards the end of his life was pretty unimpressive. It's a simple white home that has been preserved as a museum for decades. When they did make a worthwhile purchase, it was likely for something like a horse that went for around $60 in those days. It's hard to be a proper outlaw gang if you don't have a fast horse who can make a fast getaway. It's like 90% of the job. So how exactly was the gang able to waste all of that cash? Well, what would you expect? Gambling, drinking, and whatever other vices they could get into pretty much emptied their pockets until it was time to ride off after the next train. This entire thing was much more about the lifestyle of being an outlaw than it ever was about the money. The thrill of the chase was more fun than the responsibility of stolen wealth. This led to the brutal, failed robbery at the Northfield, Minnesota bank, which showed to be a lot more trouble than it was worth, costing many gang members everything. After that brutal showdown, things were never the same for the gang. This unsustainable lifestyle and the heat of ever-approaching law enforcement was probably why he was taken out by none other than one of his fellow gang members, Robert Ford, and he ended up taking him out in that very same home that is now a museum. At the very least, Jesse James didn't have to sit through the movie about it. That was bad enough. While all this makes you think that crime looks like a pretty good gig, a recent study determined that most U.S. criminals make $900 a week. Not quite mansion or yacht money, that's for sure.